Is the worst over for oil? Because OPEC's saying it sees peak demand in 20 years' time.
Yeah, I think one of the notable features of their projections yesterday was that really in their base case scenario, they're pretty bullish on oil demand for the longer term. They see a pretty sharp rebound in 2021. They do acknowledge that demand growth is going to be a little bit sticky. But they see the demand for their own crude oil going forward over the next 20 years really being pretty strong. And it puts them in fairly marked contrast with some of the scenarios that have been developed over the last couple of months by some of the big international oil companies like BP and Total here in Europe, who have developed scenarios that have a much more aggressive environmental scenario and therefore weaker demand in the sort of 20-year time period.
Yeah, that brings me to the next point. Why so bullish over the longer term? Because hasn't COVID really exacerbated the push to green and renewable technology?
I think that's a moot point. I think there's a lot of debate at the moment about the extent to which people can, if you like, build back better in the immediate aftermath of COVID-19, and whether stimulus programs can be tilted towards a much greener agenda. In Europe, arguably that is happening. In the US, it will depend an awful lot on the result of the election in the early part of November as to environmental policy there. But I think in the emerging markets, OPEC are quite right to say that oil demand is going to remain pretty robust over the next 20 years. But still, I think their demand numbers look pretty strong for the sort of 2040, 2045 period, and probably higher than a lot of other analysts were anticipating.
Why is the election such a catalyst to drive oil prices in the United States?
I think in the initial phases, the key unknown, I think, lies more on the supply side. Arguably, a Biden presidency would move fairly rapidly just towards some sort of rapprochement with Iran. And that, of course, could lead to, maybe up to 1 million barrels a day of Iranian oil coming back onto the market. It might not happen immediately, but you could see that happening within the sort of first 6 months of a Biden presidency. But the flip side of the coin is that arguably a Biden administration would try to get the US back into the Paris Climate Accords. And therefore, over the longer term, it might actually be relatively bearish in terms of restraining hydrocarbon demand in the US going forward.